You can take your seats. If you want to move to the front, you can, but you don't have to. I'm glad to see everyone here tonight. I'm Mayor Susan Sample, and I want to thank everyone for taking their time out to get here and give input on a new facilities master plan. We started this process in order to develop a long-term plan for the city. Some of our buildings, this would include built in the 40s and 50s, and we are wonderful at maintaining our facilities. We spend a lot of time evaluating and redoing, but as time has passed and the community's changed them, it's become clear that some of these buildings have deficiencies that need to be addressed in order to enhance services to the residents and make it workable for our employees. But before investing in the existing facilities, we wanted to take a time to develop a clear plan with experts, with us, and engage with our residents to see what you would like for our community. Because there's, while some are internal facing, there's going to be buildings that are going to be resident interface, and we definitely need input on that. We'll be starting with a presentation from the city's architectural consultant, Jeff Gerber from PGAL, who will provide an overview of the options identified. You see him around here, but he's going to talk through them and it'll make a little bit more sense. And the process so far, but most importantly, we'll be hearing from you tonight. Council wanted to hold this town hall to get resident feedback. And for those of you who submitted comments cards, we will be addressing those after the opening presentation. And afterwards, we'll take some time to give all of you an opportunity to walk around, look at the maps, talk to us, talk to the architects, and ask any questions you might have or give input. And I want to emphasize this town hall meeting and the other one that we're having are just the first step in the process. Implementing the master plan will take years, and there will be more meetings during this process, progress meetings. If we actually implement one of the things on the master plan, that's a time to bring more input as to whether that's the next step we want to take. And also keep in mind the drawings you see tonight are not the final look or feel for these facilities. The design, look and feel for any new building will happen at a later time. And again, this is long-term. These are facilities that should, whatever we decide, existing ones, new ones, serve our community for the next 50 to 80 years. I'd like to recognize the council members here tonight. We have Mayor Pro Tem John Montgomery, if he wants to raise his hand back there in case you want to talk to him. Councilmember Shannon Carroll, raise your hand. Councilmember John Lawrence. Councilmember Melanie Bell could not be here tonight, but she will be here on Thursday morning if you happen to attend that meeting too, but she's also available to talk via email and she can call you. All right, do you want me to turn it to you? Yes. Or, all right.
Good evening. My name is Dave Beach. I'm the city manager, and I just want to take a little bit of time to echo the mayor's comments and welcome you tonight to the town hall. I'd also like to thank the city staff for their participation in this process. They'll be here tonight at the end to answer any questions you may have about your respective facilities. As Mayor Sample stated, the goal of this process is to establish a long-term plan for the location and function of our facilities. As such, staff has been working with the consultant PGAL over the past 8 months to complete a needs assessment to identify current and future staffing levels and any needed changes to city facilities that would enhance the level of service provided to residents. Along the way, council has discussed a master plan at 3 meetings to provide feedback, update the public. All of us at the city are excited to be able to use this dedicated town hall to discuss the project in depth with you. I'd like to emphasize again, the purpose of the master plan tonight is to identify the needs and the locations of the facilities. The maps you see do not represent the design of any buildings. They are mass studies to evaluate whether or not the structure and the associated uses can fit on that site. Parking requirements, things like that. Determining the location is just the first step along the way in establishing and implementing a plan on behalf of the entire community. Thanks again, and with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff Gerber with PGAL.
Thanks, Dave. Again, my name is Jeff Gerber with PGAL, and we've been working with staff and council at various workshops over the last several months, preparing information regarding what you're going to see here today. And so this is just a small part of what we had prepared in order to get to this place. And we went through a lot of different scenarios. Louder? Okay. We went through a lot of different scenarios, looked at a lot of different ways to solve the concerns in different ways, and slowly but surely eliminated some of those choices for various reasons. And we have a few choices left that we're going to present today, and hopefully get some good citizen feedback in order to take back and make the master plan a useful tool, because that's always the plan, that's always the goal, is to not have a book that sits on a shelf somewhere that doesn't benefit the community. It's really to provide the community a roadmap in order to make good long-term decisions in how and when you maintain facilities or invest in facilities, a new roof, for example, or other new mechanical units that might be a long-term solution that may outlive the length of that building. And so this is all about planning and giving the city tools to make good long-term facility decisions. So I'm going to walk through the presentation. This is a similar presentation that was presented to council a few weeks ago. And we started out with describing what the objectives of the facilities master plan was, and you've heard it a couple times already. But it's really to identify what the long-term approach is for each of the facilities, both in terms of how big they need to be in order to satisfy the community's requirements, but also where is the best location and how best to utilize the limited city property and other buildings that exist today. And as I mentioned earlier, any long-term decisions will inform how the city operates in the short term in terms of how they're investing your money in the facilities and keeping them up to date until such time a replacement needs to happen. And then there's several factors that were considered for a lot of these decisions or points or how we got to these different choices. One was just what are the security deficiencies and requirements that have evolved over the time in these different facilities, and they continue to evolve even today with various security concerns and other public interface strategies. With facilities vulnerabilities to being able to withstand storm events or other types of events to make sure that the facilities are operational to serve you in the time of a hurricane or other types of events that you count on city services to be available and provided by the citizens. The age of and the expected remaining life cycle of structures is always a factor. And being able to understand how long and what's the right opportunity to continue to benefit from those facilities. What the program needs are. Program needs change for cities over time. What was expected of the citizens 10 years ago is different than what you probably expect today for your different programming requirements, different staffing levels, different public safety requirements, equipment that has to be accommodated, staffing levels, all of those things evolve over time, and they have pressures on facilities and the buildings and the facilities need to be able to keep up with those requirements. Just where the facility is relative to where the service need is. Is it in the right location based on where the services are provided, things like that nature. And then ultimately, what is the cost of doing an improvement versus in some other location? So the facilities that we looked at, this is a list of the facilities that were included in the facilities master plan. It's not every one of the city's facilities, but it includes the existing city hall, which includes the fire department, police department, the public works administration building, which includes the community development, the various public works facilities, not including the treatment plant, In the animal services facility, this building, which includes the community building and the senior center, the library, and also the recreational facilities at Colonial Park and the rec center. As has been mentioned, these various drafts of this document were presented to City Council on a couple different occasions. And there was some feedback that was obtained from the council members that informed some of these options. And we utilized those to try to get the input from council members. One of the desires was to retain key functions within City Center, which included the public safety of the EOC, fire department, police, IT, library, community building, and senior center. Desire to have facilities and operations connected and work for the benefit of the residents was a big concern, to make sure that the facilities were accessible and available to you as citizens, so you could gain access to them for the services that you need. A desire to have the City Hall remain at 3800 University, which is where the existing building is. A desire to consider a combined library, community building, and senior center in order to be able to cross-utilize common spaces and be able to create some efficiencies in that regard. A desire to replace the fire station rather than reconstructing at its current location at the City Hall. And that one probably deserves a little bit of explanation, that the current fire station has a lot of deficiencies that are very difficult and costly to fix. One is that the apparatus bays that contain the fire apparatus, the apparatus over time keep getting bigger. And while the apparatus bays were probably appropriate when it was built several decades ago, they're no longer of appropriate size and do potentially create slowdowns getting in and getting out for the equipment. So one of the considerations was to tear the apparatus base down and build them larger and taller, and also to provide accessibility to the second floor of the fire station, which is where all of the living quarters are, which is not currently accessible to anyone that has a mobility requirement. And so one of the desires of council was to consider replacing the fire station rather than spending money rebuilding a perfectly good building that might be able to be repurposed in some other way in its current condition. Another was a desire to consider options for relocation of some of the public works functions out of the city center. As you know, some of the public work functions are located over off of Milton. And so the desire was to consider the potential of relocating those at some point out of city center so that that property could be used in a different way to benefit the citizens, but also to be able to accommodate the current needs for the functionality of the public works departments. And there was also to consider potential of getting a recycle center in and around as part of the new public works campus as well. So we're going to talk about public works first. And this is a depiction of the site that the city currently owns. It's located in the city of Houston, not in the city of West University Place. It's located off of West Park, which is right here, and Dinkins, which is right here. So all this that's in white is currently owned by the city of West University Place. This is where your recycle center used to be located over in this zone. And so this option is relocating the public works functions that are currently in city center over to the site, which include the vehicle maintenance, the operations, the solid waste staff, the facilities maintenance, and bringing the animal services from the treatment plant over into this, so it's more accessible to staff and to public as necessary. So this concept is showing, the blue is showing a building that is sized based on the future ultimate needs of a public works department as determined working with your staff. And it also shows the animal services piece that would be potentially attached, could be attached to that building as well. It shows vehicle parking up front, and then has a lot of the fleet maintenance and the larger equipment, the trash trucks, the dump trucks, the trailers, all of those things that are currently either parked over in city center or in other places around the city would all have ability to be located there. It also has a potential fuel center here to be able to fuel those vehicles before they go out and service the community. And so this program pretty much utilizes the entire currently owned city property. And as I mentioned before, this is within the city of Houston, and there are lots of development requirements that are imposed on projects within the city of Houston, one of which is detention, which is to allow for stormwater to be detained before released into the storm systems. And you can see that there's not any room based on the required parking to have an open ditch detention system. So one of the requirements, if we use this site, is that we would have to provide an underground detention system, which are common, they're all over Houston. I actually have one in my building in West Chase. They're more expensive than doing it surface, but it is doable, and people are using those. And that would be required on the site in order to comply with the city of Houston's detention requirements. So that's assumed to be a part of this site as well. So we've listed on the slide here some of the pros and cons regarding this option. This is one of the options for public works that we're going to talk about tonight. One of the pros is that it allows the new campus to be constructed while the existing facilities in City Center remain in operation. So there's no lost time and services being provided to the citizens while this facility gets constructed. It also uses currently city-owned property, so we saw that as a pro. Some of the cons are that it does require the underground detention, as I mentioned earlier, which is not your first preference, or my first preference, due to cost. It also doesn't accommodate space for the recycle center either. It's not big enough to do both. And this also, the site plan, as you can see, uses every square inch of the site. So if in the future there's some unknown need that comes into play, that the site really doesn't accommodate that very well. So that is the that is option one. You're going to see we're going to talk about some projected project costs that we've prepared for these various options. Again, these are not designs. We're just taking historical costs and try to create a model that gives the city information about what the relative cost of an option is versus another one. And anytime I show you costs, they include total project costs, so not just construction costs, but include any other soft costs or furniture or project contingencies that the city would normally plan for any project to make sure that they can manage the overall project appropriately. And so that budget for this option is $10,650,000. The second option for Public Works Campus is using the same city-owned property, but is also considering the adjacent property, which is currently owned by somebody else. And so you can see this site is bigger than the previous slide, basically, use this part of that site. And this includes that adjacent property. If I go back to each, this includes this adjacent property that is showing here. And this has the exact same program as the previous one. It's the same size building. It's a different shape. And it's a different shape because the site configuration allows it to be a more simplified shape potentially. The other site, because of its upward shape, requires the building to be a little more less conventional in order to allow the free flow of vehicles. And this particular option shows the animal services being located in a separate structure up here. This has the car vehicles located on the front side and has all of the fleet vehicles located in the back. One of the benefits of this, getting the additional property, this allows for you to have open ditch detention, which is much less expensive than the underground detention, which is required on the other option. And potentially, that in the future, if you wanted to put a recycle back on here, that you could convert a portion of this detention pond to underground detention and put the recycle on top of it, if that also would be possible in this kind of a configuration. So again, the same users here that as in the first option, it's just on a differently configured site, and it has more site, has the same number of parking spaces from one site to the other. So they're comparable in that regard. So going through the pros for option, we're calling Public Works option 2. This also allows for the existing to remain operational because it's being built, leaving existing in place, remaining functional. A pro that it allows open detention to be done here, which allows it to be less first cost construction. Potentially, it's easier. You can see how there could be future expansion either for parking or building or something else if you needed it in the future. And as I mentioned, it could also accommodate a recycle center if the city desired to put it here as well. And then obviously the big con is it requires additional property acquisition. And so there's also a budget for this one as well. And you can see up here at the top that the budget we put together for this option is $9,430,000. And that does not include the cost of property. And you go, well, why is this one less expensive? It's really the difference between what it costs to build the underground detention and what it costs to build the open ditch detention. There's a significant cost difference between those two. Okay. So we're going to move to City Center next. And you'll see there are boards around that show the existing configurations, which we don't have a slide of that up here. But I'm just going to quickly talk about it so that you have some frame of reference. So currently, we're sitting in the community building, which is located right here. This is the existing city hall, and this is the existing church. And then you see the round of the existing water tanks. In terms of property that the city owns around City Center, is these tan-colored areas are property that the city owns that potentially could be parking as well, some of which is not, some of which has buildings on, some of which currently doesn't have parking. But this is currently configured as it is today. So in this particular option, this option we're calling City Center Option 1, this is showing a new fire station that would be located currently where we're sitting today, which is in place of the community building and the library next door. The fire station would basically span that whole block. The fire truck would access out here on Auden. This option also has the new replacement library community center as a combined building located over here where the Public Works Administration building is, as well as some of the operational buildings. If you remember from the last slide, the fleet maintenance building, a portion of this ops building, and these outbuildings All of those functions are would be moving to the new Public Works campus in this strategy. In this option, the City Hall users would be exactly the same as they are today, with the exception of the fire department, which would move out here. And the IT department, which is currently located in one of these outbuildings, would be moved into City Hall. And the Public Works administration and community development would move from their current location into the City Hall, utilizing the space that's currently occupied, that's available with the fire department moving out. So we're not making this building any bigger. In this option, we're just repurposing it and putting some of different uses in there that don't have the space limitations that the fire department has. You'll see in one of the, I'm going to point it out here, is that currently there's a pump station that operates your water system. It's located in an existing building here. There is a near-term, not near-term, sometime in the next decade requirement to replace that component. And so the question is, if you're going to do it, we're going to show you another option that maybe it could go in a different place in City Center. But in this option, we're showing it located pretty close to where it is today. So again, this option would then take where the fleet maintenance is and turn that into additional parking. There'd be additional parking located right here adjacent to the library community senior center. This parking at City Hall remains as it is. And there's some additional parking availability around the fire station. And then this single lot potentially could also be parking that the city owns today. So again, some pros and cons for this. The pros are that the library community building, based on sequencing, could be built leaving the existing buildings in place and operational. And then the fire station could be built once those are relocated. It could be built leaving the existing fire department in its current location. So again, you wouldn't have any loss of operation. They would just move from one location to the other when it's finished. This option also maximizes the city-owned property with parking, because I know parking is a challenge in City Center at different times of the day and different times of the year. So this option picks up some additional parking. And this would still utilize some of the shared parking that the currently arrangement is with the church in these areas over here. So again, the project budgets for the fire station, this option is $11 million, round numbers. This combined one-story library community building would be about $10 million, $720,000. And then the renovation of City Hall, which would be the last piece, which would be repurposing the City Hall and would be $5.5 million. So option 2 of the City Center is very, very, very similar to the other one. In fact, the only thing that is different is that we're showing potentially putting the pump room over here and not having it be a limitation for how the library community center could be constructed. So other than that, it is exactly the same as option 1. The costs are exactly the same. The only real difference is whatever the cost of that pump room is not included in that. The pros and cons are the same as the previous option as well. So we also talked about what are some opportunities for future city center enhancements that could happen, at some point, either as independent projects or as part of any one of these developments. Would be one scenario is to provide more efficient off-street parking to reduce some of the on-street street demand, a lot of people that walk back and forth through here and are dodging cars. And maybe there's an opportunity to enhance those streetscapes and make them more pedestrian friendly than they are today. So this slide is a summary of the costs from what I showed you previously. The cost of each of those elements are the same here as they were on the previous ones, but they're just all on the same page. So the two options for public works that I showed you, the first one, and then the second one, plus the cost of land. So it could be one or the other of these. The cost of a new combined community building, senior center, library is what I showed you before. Same thing with the fire station and the city hall. What I will note about these is that, just remind you, this doesn't include the cost of property up here, but these are also projected in today's costs because we don't know, is this 1 year, 5 years, 20 years off in the future. And so in order to be able to accurately provide the city information, we always project them in what it would be if you did it today. And knowing that these will be off into the future, and whatever the inflation is at that point would have to be adjusted with these numbers. So this next slide is one that's sort of, which this actually has calendar dates up here, but that's not necessarily what it's implying. What it is implying, though, is there is a sequence to what I described in these options where some pieces have to be done in front of the other in order to not have that disruption of services. The first project to really to free up some of those sites for future improvements is to move the public works components out of city centers. So no matter when it happens, that should be the first thing. That then frees up the site to do the community building and senior center. And then that frees up the site potentially to do the fire station. They can't be done at the same time unless you're going to find an alternative location for those. So we're just trying to show you there is a sequence to these, no matter how far apart they are, that makes sense for the most economical. And as I mentioned, the city hall piece would have to be last because it's filling in when the fire department vacates. So this is kind of the order they have to be in relative to each other. We're just showing you this is how fast they could be if you did them all in the fastest possible way without losing service. So with that, that is the description of the boards. These are the same slides the boards are the same on both sides. I know that was a lot of information. It sounds like we have some questions.
Assistant to the city manager. I spoke with most of you as you came in earlier this evening. We received 3 comments or questions that people wish to be addressed during this session. After this, we'll have some unstructured time where you all can walk around and look some more at the exhibits and also discuss with Jeff or any of the staff members here today if you have any additional follow-up questions. So the first question I received, the rendering appears to significantly reduce the senior center and or library with the percentage of residents that are seniors. Why? So Jeff, can you go back to, so on that image on the mass study, shows a 21,000 square foot library. The current senior center is 9,000 square feet, and the current library is 6,000 square feet. So this shows an increase in square footage for those facilities. Yeah. Library, community, and senior center is 21,000 square feet in that image. The second question or comment, will ADA be included in every building? Will an area for Westview dogs be included? Will all seniors get coffee in the new center? Should combine library with true senior center. Large trucks should be parked outside Westview Park space. Park space needed east of Buffalo Speedway. Be fiscally responsible, not wasteful. So for the first question, will ADA be included in every building? Yes, ADA requirements and accessibility would be included in the design process. Again, the purpose of this project is to look at location and functionality, but during any design process, those would be included. Will an area for Westview dogs be included? No, dog parks are outside of the scope of this facility's master plan project. Will seniors get coffee in the new center? Programmatic decisions are not part of this facility's master plan project. Thank you. The third question, is the proposed animal control building / runs designed to be climate controlled? Proposed capacity, can you elaborate on the allocated square footage for the library and community center? Will community center classes be relocated during build out?
So the assumption on the animal control is that there would be a indoor and outdoor component to each of the kennels. So there would be a climate controlled opportunity as well as a dog run. So the animals can be both outside and inside depending on the situation.
And it's the proposed capacity is 2,000 square feet. That would be 1,000 for the indoor area, 1,000 for the outside dog run area. Can you elaborate on the allocated square footage for the library and community center? That combined facility in that concept is 21,000 square feet total.
If I understand the question correctly, you're looking for the ratio of what would be the library compared to the senior center, community center. So as Will said, it's 21,000 square feet. The current community building is 9,000 square feet. So when you look at it, it won't be smaller, but depending on how the final configuration, and as we talked about, it's really a mass. So as we go through the design process, there'll be that feedback with those stakeholders or the users of those facilities to kind of look at how that facility will develop, whether it's a 1-story, a 2-story, or a combination 1 and 2-story. What functions, say you might have some meeting rooms that can be shared use. At night they're available for one, during the day they're available for the other. So when you kind of look at the overall configuration and allocation of that space, that'll really be decided during the design process when you sit down and really start talking about with the users of the facility and the library, those types of things. So it's not going to be smaller, but it'll be more efficient. So it should be, it should fill bigger.
Will community center classes be relocated during build out? Could you go to the schedule? So for the purpose of this proposed schedule, that breakdown of the build out won't result in a loss of service because the site, the new library, community center, community building, senior center would be built while this facility is still in operation and continues to provide programming for residents. And if you have any additional questions that you wish to submit at this time, we can continue to take those. You can also, if you have any follow-up, email facilitiesplan@westutx.gov. The fourth comment, I'd like to see some of the buildings not be demolished. New buildings should be certified to LEED Platinum. A 6% increase in initial costs. B, 27% ROI typically for energy savings. C,
I orchestrated a retro commissioning of a LEED Gold building, which had slipped in its maintenance in 2018. As of 2021, it saved $226,000 from the high consumption in 2017.
So, when it comes to the final design, the look, fit, and finish of the buildings, there'll be some decisions that'll be coming before council. They're looking at those types of things about sustainability. So, as for this town hall, it's really about the location. And then there'll be some policy decisions that'll come out about how the buildings are built. Whether it's LEED silver, whether it's LEED gold, LEED platinum. With each of those decisions, there's a cost associated with it. And so a lot of the way that those buildings will be looked at, they will be energy efficient. They will be more energy efficient than they are now. The degree of that energy efficiency will really be determined by council policy and direction from the community, because ultimately in the end, the taxpayer has to pay for any of those decisions. So hopefully that's, the answer, because some of those questions, to get into the specifics, we're not there yet. We're really looking at location of the facilities. We're kind of showing the sequence. So this, it's not, because I've heard some, it's going to happen overnight. And you can see even on a optimum schedule, we're looking at 5 years. And I'm going to be, I don't want to bang on Houston, but we show 6 months for permitting in the city of Houston. That's my fingers crossed. So it could be longer, and if Houston takes longer to permit, it pushes the schedule out. If the city was to purchase the land, the decision was to look at purchasing the land adjacent, then we have to replat. That's going to add some time. So what you saw there in 5 years, that's the optimal schedule if everything was to move and we're going forward. So there's still some time. The design process for the public works facility will actually probably be some of the bigger parts of talking about what we're looking at for energy efficiencies, how we want to look about the sustainable footprint for the city, and that'll come out during that process. But the design process on the public works, I would say it's going to be anywhere from 6 to 9 months, just on the design process. So it could go longer. It's once again, we're just kind of showing typical.
So the last question that I received.
Given the current site of the fire station at the place that is widest with best visibility in city center, and the fact that many of functional needs need for exposure and administration and police, why is one of the options not to demolish City Hall and rebuild a 2-story City Hall and fire department? This is
Thus obviating the need for tearing down additional buildings.
So one of the options looked at reconfiguring the City Hall space. To tear down City Hall, rebuild City Hall, the price estimate alone just for that was $30 million. And with that, when you tear down that building, we're now having to relocate police, dispatch, fire, utilities, finance. No one would care about administration. They probably could push us out of the city. So, but you would have to find alternative locations during that build process. And due to the cost of it, you look at it. One part, as Jeff mentioned earlier, the city commissioned a study because one of it was looking at, I will say that city staff has always been very good at looking at how do we optimize the facilities that we have. The majority of the buildings were built in the 50s under a civil defense grant. So, and we take care of them. Are they perfect? No. Are they optimal? No, but we'll make do with the best that we can. But there's been a change over the last 70 years since those buildings was built. And as Jeff mentioned, fire apparatus have gotten bigger. So one of the things was until in 2011, when we did some minor renovations, we lifted the height of the doors. Because prior to that, the water cannon could not fit on top of the pumper truck. Now with the trucks there, if there's any maintenance that needs to be done on the truck during a hazard, extreme weather, a hurricane, that maintenance on the top of the truck cannot be done in the current base without the firefighters basically shimmying on top of the wall. And that's very inefficient. It's not safe for injuries and things like that. So those equipment have to be pulled out of the fire apparatus bay. Also, when they're backing in, it's very narrow. Now, they're skilled, don't get me wrong, I've joked with this, if they can't back into a wider door, because driving in the streets, everyone knows. But the fire apparatus bay was built in the 50s. If you go back to our childhood, fire trucks were a lot smaller, and they're getting bigger, there's more functionality to it. The other deficiencies in that fire department is the decontamination room when they come back from a call. Some used to be, they would worry only about smoke, those carcinogens that come from that type of thing. But now you have, with the advent of COVID and the pandemic, you also have pathogens. So their equipment comes back and it needs to go through a decontamination process. Otherwise, they're tracking it back into the workspace, the living space, those types of things. So when you try to reconfigure space for all these competing needs, gear storage, so it's properly stored. Right now, the gear is stored in the bay where they work out, which is where you get to some of the cross-contamination complaints. So when you look at a modern fire station, there are some deficiencies in the current station. We looked at locations of the fire stations. There was 3 locations looked at. One was existing, the other one was moving into where Public Works was, between Milton and Amherst. And then the third location was this location. So when you talk about visibility, optimal for being present, visible, those types of things, there's a lot of public good that comes from it. Their optimal location was their current location. The problem is the optimal location didn't provide optimal space. So when you look at the next optimal location, that was this location. It still allows them to go out onto audit. They can make it to university. And with that, when you looked at the location over at the existing Public Works, they were coming out onto either Milton or Amherst, depending on which side. And then you got to go down College, and it's a little bit of a different trek. While you might say it's only a block, that there's a difference to it. So with the location, it provides better egress, better site visibility for those residents, because they get a lot of, sometimes they get a lot of walk up. So we looked at all the locations, and what you're seeing tonight is really kind of when you looked at all the pros and cons of the different locations, and then how do you keep continuity of services, it's kind of that domino effect that we presented tonight.
Those were all of the questions that I received for the public record. Does anyone have any additional questions that they would like addressed this evening? Yes, ma'am.
It used to be the Coke property. It was bought by a developer. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, who owns the land? And I'm assuming you're saying the land by the Public Works, the proposed location. So that acre is 1.56 acres. It was part of the old Coke property. So it was sold just about a year before the pandemic hit. And it's owned by Frank Liu and a party. So, we good? Is there any follow-up?
Should we buy?
Should we buy? That's always $1 million question. I'm sorry, what? Because it was sold as 15.5 acres when the Coke property sold, so it was sold all as one. And the total price, I don't know what it is, but I've heard it's in the upwards of 80 to 100 million. So the city actually did look at the Coke property for off-site detention. And so when you look at because to go purchase offsite detention, if you, so it's kind of digressing a little bit, but offsite detention, so we're looking at some drainage improvements, and you can't put more water into the watershed before and after your improvements. And so what they require is mitigation. It's either through detention on site, as you talked about with Public Works, or you can buy offsite detention where you're dumping the water into the watershed and you hold it there so you're not pushing that water downstream and flooding others. So one of the options we looked at was purchasing that property, digging a big hole and dumping water, because the question is was it cheaper to spend the money there than to go try to buy it somewhere else or to utilize other land? But it was really the cost. Because unfortunately you have to come and justify to the taxpayer, say, hey, we want to go spend $100 million on 15 acres. So the parking lot property, it's expensive. We're trying to figure out what the price is. Unfortunately, Mr. Liu is a really good buyer. He's a good seller on his part. So it's a really matter. It's going to be, it's going to be a cost benefit to look at that. So when you say buying property, I think everyone who's been in Westview for 30 years, you probably made a good purchase. So land in this area, the one thing, I've heard multiple times from plenty of council members, council, and residents is they're not making any more land in this area. The city will be around, heaven forbid something, for the next 50 to 100 plus years. So when you say buy land, I would always say yes, but then you got to justify and support that decision, because I don't think you go wrong. So. The question was, is there any proposed plans for the property? I'm not aware of any. There was plans before the pandemic, but I'm not aware of any after. Okay. Yes, sir.
Me, sir?
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Justin Schultz. I'm the chair of Westview Sustainability Task Force, and council, and a number of you have probably heard this, but last week we presented our draft recommendations to council. And one of the things that we asked that the council and the planners look at for the master plan for our facilities is to make sure that they're thinking really smart about the choices that they're making in terms of energy efficiency in the buildings, LEED certification for the buildings, reusing buildings where feasible and reasonable for the city's future needs. All of the choices that the cities will be making in the next, several months to a couple of years on this master plan are going to have impacts for the next 50 plus years. And we just want to make sure that as those are happening, that we're really thinking about sustainability, energy efficiency, and not letting cost be something that prevents us from making a smart decision that will have implications for generations to come. So.
Thank you. All right. See no more. Feel free to walk around. Staff, the architect, council will be available. Ask questions away. If you have any follow-up questions or comments that you want, please submit them. As Will gave you the address, it's also online. If you just search Facilities Master Plan, you can get to the webpage. Thank you.